never liked hospitals, even when they were full of people. There's something about the smell of disinfectant and the way sound echoes down the hallways that always made me uneasy. But working night security in an abandoned hospital, that was something else entirely. The place had been shut down for years. The city was still arguing over whether to demolish it or turn it into apartments. In the meantime, they hired me and 2 other guards to keep an eye on it, make sure no kids broke in, no vandals, no junkies looking for a place to crash. Most nights it was quiet, just me, my flashlight, and the hollow silence of corridors that once saved lives. That night started like any other. I was assigned to the East Wing, the oldest part of the building. The lights didn't work there, so the only illumination came from my flashlight and the weak glow of the moon through cracked windows. The air was stale, heavy with dust, and every step I took seemed to stir echoes that lingered longer than they should. Around midnight, I did my usual sweep of the 2nd floor. I passed the nurses' station, still cluttered with paperwork yellowed by time, and made my way down a hall lined with patient rooms. Most doors were open, their rooms empty except for rusting bed frames and peeling paint. But one door was closed. I had walked this hall a dozen times before, and that door had always been wide open. I stopped. My flashlight beam trembled slightly in my hand. Maybe the wind, I thought. The windows were broken in a lot of places. I pushed the door open slowly. The hinges groaned, the sound scraping down the hallway like nails on metal. Inside was a small patient room. Nothing unusual, just a bed frame, a toppled chair, and shattered glass on the floor. But the air inside felt wrong, colder, denser. I stepped in, scanning the walls. That's when I heard it, a faint shuffle, like bare feet dragging across the linoleum. It came from the hallway behind me. I whipped around, shining my light into the corridor. Empty, silent. My own breathing seemed too loud in the stillness. I told myself I was jumpy, that old buildings make noises. But as I turned back toward the room, I froze. The chair, the one that had been toppled, was now upright. My throat went dry. I backed out of the room slowly, never taking my eyes off the chair. The moment I was in the hallway again, I pulled the door shut and kept moving, my footsteps quick, my ears straining for any sound. At the far end of the hall was the stairwell. I reached for the handle, but before I could push it open, I heard something faint behind me. Whispering. It was too soft to make out the words, but it was unmistakable. Low, overlapping voices, like several people speaking at once. I swung my flashlight back. The hall was empty, but the sound grew clearer. The whispers seemed to seep from the very walls, sliding into my ears like cold water. My instinct screamed at me to get out. I yanked open the stairwell door and hurried down. The stairwell swallowed me in pitch darkness, the beam of my flashlight barely piercing the gloom. My footsteps clanged against the metal stairs, echoing into the black void below. And then, halfway down, I heard footsteps above me, slow, deliberate, matching my pace. I froze, craning my neck upward. The stairwell above was empty, just shadows stretching upward into nothing.
but the footsteps continued, circling the floor I had just left. That's when my radio crackled. "East Wing?" It was one of the other guards. His voice sounded distorted, thin. "You're not supposed to be there." My stomach dropped. I pressed the radio to my mouth. "What do you mean? I was assigned this wing." Static. Then faintly, the same voice, but this time closer, almost behind me. "You're not supposed to be here." The radio slipped from my hand and clattered down the stairs. I bolted, taking the steps two at a time, the sound of footsteps above growing faster, closer. I didn't stop until I burst through the exit door into the cold night air. When I looked back, the stairwell door was ajar, swinging slightly, as if someone had just passed through. But no one came out. I refused to finish that shift. I sat in my car with the engine running until morning. The next day, when I told the supervisor, he frowned. "That wing's been sealed off for months. You weren't assigned there." I showed him the paperwork. My assignment clearly said East Wing. He shook his head, pale. "That's impossible. That wing doesn't even have power." I never worked there again. But sometimes when I close my eyes, I still hear the whispers telling me I don't belong.
Working night shifts at a mall sounds easier than it really is. People imagine you just walk around air-conditioned halls, maybe drink coffee and wait for sunrise. But when the last customers leave and the shops shut their gates, the mall turns into a different place. Quiet, cavernous, and unsettling. I had been on the job for about a year. My shift ran from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. when the cleaning crew clocked out and I was left alone with miles of polished tile, mannequins frozen behind glass, and the low hum of fluorescent lights. It was eerie, yes, but manageable. Until that night. Around 2 a.m., I was making rounds on the second floor. Everything looked normal until I noticed a clothing store with its gate slightly open. That was unusual. Managers were meticulous about locking up. I approached slowly, my flashlight catching on glossy posters of smiling models. "Hello?" I called, my voice echoing strangely in the empty space. No answer. I ducked under the gate and stepped inside. The air smelled faintly of perfume, mixed with dust. Rows of mannequins stood dressed in winter coats and scarves, their blank faces turned toward me like silent witnesses. I did a sweep of the shop, checking the stock room and emergency exit. Nothing. As I returned to the floor, I stopped dead. One of the mannequins had moved. It wasn't drastic, just a small shift in posture. An arm raised slightly higher than before. I stared at it, my skin prickling. I wanted to convince myself I was mistaken, but the dust mark on the tile showed where the base had been.
I backed out of the store quickly, pulling the gate down and locking it tight. My radio crackled as I started walking again. "You shouldn't be in there," a voice said. I froze. It wasn't any of the guards I knew. The tone was flat, monotone, almost mechanical. "Who is this?" I asked, pressing the button. Static, then silence. Trying to steady myself, I moved toward the food court. It was massive, with dozens of chairs and tables lined up in neat rows. The cleaners had already finished, But as my flashlight swept across the floor, I saw something that shouldn't have been there. Wet footprints. They started near the soda machines and led across the tiles toward the children's play area. They were bare feet, small, like a child's, still glistening under the light. But the entire mall had been closed for hours. I followed them reluctantly. The prints wound through the tables, stopping at the plastic slide in the corner of the play zone. My beam illuminated the tunnel at the top. Empty. Then I heard it, soft, giggling, high-pitched, echoing faintly inside the slide. My chest tightened. I stepped closer, trying to angle the light, but the sound seemed to retreat, bouncing deeper inside as if the slide stretched on endlessly. I pulled away, my heart hammering. That's when the escalators roared to life. The sudden whir of machinery cut through the silence. I spun around. The escalator behind me was running, steps grinding upward, though power to the mall was supposed to be isolated at night. My flashlight flickered. On the moving steps stood a figure. At first, I thought it was another mannequin. It had that rigid stillness, a tall man in a suit, head tilted slightly, face pale in the dim glow. But as I raised my light, his eyes reflected, glinting unnaturally. I stumbled backward, radio clutched in my hand. "Control, are you seeing this? Somebody's inside the mall." No response.
The figure rode the escalator to the top and stepped off silently, turning a corner without a sound. I rushed after him, but when I reached the spot, the corridor stretched empty in both directions. The only trace was the faint smell of perfume, the same as the clothing store. Shaken, I decided to retreat to the security office, where the cameras might provide answers. I pulled up footage from the second floor. My hands trembled as I scrolled through the timeline. The monitor showed the escalator, frozen and still. No movement, no figure. The clothing store? The gate never appeared open. And the footprints across the food court? Nothing but spotless tiles. I leaned back, cold sweat trickling down my spine. Then the feed glitched. For a split second, every camera blinked to black. When the picture returned, all 7 monitors displayed the same image, and close-up of a mannequin's face. Its glassy eyes stared directly into the lens, and then, impossibly, it blinked. I tore my eyes away, yanked the plug from the wall, and sat in the dark office until sunrise. The next morning, the mall opened as usual, bustling with shoppers and the sound of laughter. But to me, those halls will never feel alive again. At night, they belong to something else. Factories are unsettling places when they're alive with noise, machines pounding, belts grinding, sparks flying. But when they're dead, when all that remains is rust and silence, they feel like tombs. I worked night security at one such tomb, an abandoned textile factory on the edge of town. The building stretched for blocks, a skeleton of steel and broken glass. Inside, the air smelled of oil and mildew. The company went bankrupt years ago, and everything was left as it was. Half-finished rolls of fabric, paperwork scattered on desks,
lockers still filled with boots. It was as though everyone had walked out in the middle of their shift and never returned. My job was simple: patrol the grounds, make sure no squatters or thieves broke in, and log my rounds every hour. Most nights, I sat in the booth outside, sipping coffee, too uneasy to wander too deep inside. But that night, something pulled me in. It was around 1 a.m. when I heard it. A clang, sharp and metallic, echoes through the silent halls. I froze. No wind could make a sound like that. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped onto the main floor. My boots crunched on dust and glass. Rows of machines loomed in the darkness, like hunched animals. My beam caught on rusted gears and belts dangling like nooses. Another clang, this time from the far end of the hall. "Hello?" My voice carried too far, swallowed by the cavernous space. I followed the sound, passing through shadows that seemed to stretch unnaturally. My light shook in my grip. That's when I noticed the fabric. A roll of cloth sat unraveled across the floor, stretching yards into the dark. It hadn't been there before. The edges were frayed, as though someone had been pulling them steadily. I shone my light down the length of the fabric. It disappeared behind one of the machines. "Anyone there?" I forced the words out, my throat dry. Silence. I rounded the machine. The fabric ended abruptly, cut raggedly as if torn. Beyond it, the floor was bare. I should have gone back, but instead I pressed on toward the break room. The door stood ajar, the light above flickering weakly. I stepped inside. The smell hit me first, like burned fabric mixed with something sour. The tables were still littered with coffee mugs, one overturned with dried stains spreading across the surface. Then I saw the locker. Its door swung open slowly, creaking, though no wind stirred. Inside hung a worker's uniform, but it wasn't empty. The sleeves were filled, the pant legs dangling just above the floor. It looked like someone invisible was standing inside it. I stumbled back, my flashlight beam shaking wildly. The uniform swayed slightly, as if turning toward me. I bolted from the room, heart slamming against my ribs. The factory seemed alive now. Every step echoed with unnatural sharpness. Every shadow seemed to ripple. I hurried back toward the main floor, only to stop dead. The machines were running. Not all of them, but enough. Belts spun, gears turned, a deafening hum filled the hall. Yet there was no power to the building. I had checked the breakers myself earlier in the night. Through the noise, I heard something worse. Voices. Dozens of them, layered, muttering in unison. Not words I could understand, but a low, rhythmic chant. It vibrated in my chest, pulling me closer to the center of the hall where the sound was loudest. My flashlight flickered, then died. I was plunged into the pulsing glow of machines that shouldn't be alive. Shapes moved between them, figures half seen, their bodies flickering like shadows cast by flames. Workers, maybe, or what was left of them. I caught glimpses of faces pale as ash, eyes hollow, mouths moving in that endless chant. I staggered backward, trying not to look, trying not to breathe, but one of the figures broke away, turning toward me fully. It wore no face at all. just a blank, smooth surface where features should have been. That broke me. I turned and ran, crashing into machinery, tearing through the darkness until I burst outside into the freezing night air. The noise cut off instantly. Behind me, the factory stood silent and dead once more. I called my supervisor and demanded to be reassigned. He didn't argue. But even now, when I drive past that factory, I swear I see light bleeding from the cracks of its boarded windows. And sometimes, if the night is still, I hear the faint hum of machines that should never run again.
Office buildings aren't supposed to be scary. They're clean, modern, sterile places filled with glass walls and buzzing computers. But at night, when the lights shut off and the hum of people disappears, they feel like mausoleums of glass and steel. I worked security in one such tower downtown. 25 floors, mostly law firms and consulting companies. My shift was from 10 p.m. until sunrise. I had to patrol every floor once an hour, then check in at the lobby desk. It was dull work, or at least it should have been. One night, I started on the 18th floor. The place smelled faintly of carpet cleaner and stale coffee. Rows of cubicles stretched in perfect lines, glowing faintly from the emergency exit signs. My flashlight beam swept over desks littered with papers and photographs, the remnants of people who lived their days here. As I walked, I noticed a monitor flicker on. Just one, at the far corner of the floor. Its glow lit up the cubicle walls around it, blue and unnatural. I frowned. The building's power grid was supposed to cut everything off after 9 p.m. I approached slowly. The screen displayed the login page, just the company logo pulsing faintly. Then, without me touching anything, it began typing. The keyboard clicked by itself, keys pressing rapidly. Letters filled the screen. Get out. I stepped back, my stomach lurching. The message cleared. Then more words appeared, typed with deliberate slowness. Someone is here. The monitor shut off. The cubicle went dark again. My throat went dry. I radioed down to the control booth. Anyone accessing the systems right now? No reply. Just static. I decided to speed up my round and move to the next floor. The stairwell was cold, colder than it should have been, like the air itself was sinking through me. I reached the 19th floor, pushed open the heavy door, then froze. Every single phone on every desk was ringing. Not in sync, but in a chaotic chorus of shrill tones echoing off the glass walls. The sound clawed at my nerves, dissonant and overwhelming. I moved quickly, yanking one handset off the receiver. The ringing cut off, only to be replaced by a voice. My own voice, whispering, distorted, as if coming from a tunnel. Why are you still here? I slammed the phone down. All the other ringing stopped instantly. Silence pressed in, thick and heavy. That's when I noticed the conference room. Its glass walls gave me a clear view inside. The long table was empty, but the chairs were pulled out as though an invisible meeting had just ended. And on the whiteboard, written in thick black marker that hadn't been there before. 20th floor, now.
My hand shook as I reached for the stairwell door again. Against every instinct, I went up. The 20th floor was darker than the others, the emergency lights dimmer, the exit signs barely glowing. I moved carefully between the cubicles, ears straining. Then I heard footsteps. Not mine. These were heavier, deliberate, circling just out of sight. I spun, flashlight sweeping the aisles. Nothing. The sound moved again. Closer. My chest tightened. I backed toward the elevator lobby when the overhead lights flickered on, just for a second. And in that brief flash, I saw them. Dozens of figures stand at the far end of the office, perfectly still. Silhouettes in suits, blurred and featureless. The lights blinked off. Darkness returned. My heart hammered. I raised the flashlight, but the beam cut through only space. The figures were gone. I didn't wait to see if they'd return. I bolted down the stairs, past floor after floor, until I reached the lobby. The guard at the front desk looked up, confused. "You okay?" he asked. I wanted to tell him everything, but when I glanced at the security monitors behind him, my blood froze. On every screen, every floor's feed, stood those same silhouettes. All of them are facing the cameras. All of them are waiting.
Construction sites are creepy, even in daylight. Skeletal frames of half-built towers, scaffolding creaking, tarps snapping in the wind. At night, they're worse. Empty shells echoing with strange noises, shadows twisting in beams of steel. I never liked guarding them, but the pay was good, so I stayed. This site was a high-rise downtown, 20 floors planned, but only 12 standing. My job was to patrol the perimeter, make sure no one snuck in to steal copper wiring or equipment. Most nights, I stuck to the ground. But one night, I decided to check the upper floors. The elevator wasn't installed yet, so I climbed the stairs. Each level was a maze of concrete pillars and dangling wires. The smell of wet cement lingered in the air. By the time I reached the 8th floor, I was out of breath. That's when I heard it. Hammering. Slow, steady, metallic strikes echo through the hollow floors above me. No one should have been working at that hour. The crews left by 6 p.m. and I was alone.
I climbed another flight. The hammering grew louder, sharper. I gripped my flashlight tighter, the beam cutting across unfinished walls. Dust swirled in the air like smoke. On the 10th floor, I found a single work light glowing faintly. It shouldn't have been on. Power was cut nightly to prevent accidents. Beneath its weak glow stood a figure. A worker, I thought at first. He wore a hard hat, overalls smeared with cement. His back was to me, shoulders rising and falling with the motion of his hammer as he struck a metal beam. "Hey!" I called, trying to sound firm. "Site's closed. You can't be here." He didn't stop. The hammer rose and fell in that same rhythm, each strike echoing like a heartbeat. I stepped closer, uneasy. "Did you hear me?" That's when he froze. The hammer stopped midair, slowly, unnaturally slow,
The figure turned his head toward me. My light caught his face, if you could call it that. There were no eyes, no mouth, just smooth, pale skin stretched where features should have been. The hammer clanged to the floor. The figure straightened, head tilting in a jerky, unnatural way. Then it stepped toward me. I staggered back, nearly tripping over loose rebar. My flashlight flickered as the air grew colder, heavy with a smell like rusted blood. The figure moved faster, its steps uneven but relentless, echoing against the bare concrete.
I bolted for the stairs, adrenaline surging. My boots pounded down level after level, but the footsteps followed, slamming against the floor above me, always just one flight behind. By the 5th floor, my lungs burned. I glanced up, only to see the figure leaning over the stairwell railing above. Its blank face stared down at me, head cocked. I sprinted the rest of the way down, bursting onto the ground floor. The site was silent again. No footsteps, no hammering, just the sound of my own ragged breathing. I radioed my supervisor, barely able to form words. "There's someone in the building. Something." Static cut me off. Then faintly, my own voice repeated back, "There's someone in the building. Something." I threw the radio to the ground and ran to the perimeter fence. My hands shook as I fumbled with the lock. Finally, I stumbled out onto the street, the city's normal lights and traffic a shocking contrast to the void inside. When I looked back, the work light on the 10th floor was still glowing, and in its halo of light, I swear I saw a faceless figure standing at the edge, watching me leave. I quit the next day. The site eventually finished construction, turned into luxury apartments. People live there now, unaware of what lingers in the walls. But sometimes, when I drive past at night, I see a flicker of light in an empty window, and I wonder if the tenants ever hear hammering when they're alone.
It was past midnight, and the building above was long closed. My shift was simple: watch the underground parking lot, make sure no one sneaks in. Usually, it was boring. Just the hum of fluorescent lights and the echo of dripping water from old pipes. That night, I was making my rounds when I noticed something strange: a car engine running. The sound bounced off the concrete walls, low and steady. But the problem was, every single car in the lot had its lights off, its windows fogged with stillness. None of them was on. I followed the sound, deeper and deeper into the shadows. The humming grew louder until it was right next to me. But when I turned, nothing was there, just rows of silent cars. My stomach twisted. I knew I wasn't imagining it. I pulled out my flashlight and swept it across the rows. That's when I saw movement. A figure, crouched low, slipping between the vehicles. It moved unnaturally fast, almost crawling. I shouted, "Security! Stop right there!" My voice echoed, but the figure didn't. It just vanished into the dark.
Then the cars started reacting. One by one, headlights flickered on, blinding me, even though none of the keys were in the ignitions. I stumbled backward, heart hammering.
The hum of the engine returned, this time right behind me. When I turned, there was no one, just a puddle of fresh oil spreading across the floor, though no car nearby was leaking. I don't know what I saw that night, but I never volunteered for underground shifts again.
The site was supposed to be finished years ago, but the project was abandoned halfway through. My job was to keep vandals out and make sure no one got hurt wandering in. The place was a skeleton of concrete and rusted rebar, with the wind whistling through empty frames. One night, I was walking the upper floors when I heard it hammering, slow, steady, like someone driving nails into wood. But there hadn't been construction here for years. I froze, listening. The sound echoed through the hollow building, moving from one floor to another as if someone was building in the dark. I climbed the stairs, flashlight shaking in my hand. The hammering stopped the second I reached the top. Silence. Just the cold wind. I turned, ready to head back down, when I saw it. Footprints in the dust. Bare, human footprints leading deeper into the floor. I followed them, heart pounding, until they ended at the edge of the unfinished balcony. The drop was at least 10 stories. But here's the part that still makes my skin crawl. The prints didn't stop. They kept going, off the ledge, into thin air. Before I could process it, the hammering started again, this time right behind me. I spun around, light flashing across steel beams and empty concrete. No one was there, just the echo of the hammer driving nails into nothing. I backed away, refusing to turn my back on the sound, until I made it down to the ground. I never set foot in that building again, and I'm not sure anyone should.